There are 28 days until Election Day. And last night, CBS aired its 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris. Now, the program has interviewed the candidates in every presidential election dating back to 1968. But Donald Trump backed out this year. And before airing the interview with Vice President Harris, 60 Minutes began with a note about Trump. Here's part of that explanation.
It's been a tradition for more than half a century that the major party candidates for president sit down with 60 Minutes in October. In 1968, it was Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey. This year, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump accepted our invitation. But unfortunately, last week, Trump canceled. The campaign offered shifting explanations. First, it complained that we would fact-check the interview. We fact-check every story. Later, Trump said he needed an apology for his interview in 2020. Trump claims correspondent Lesley Stahl said in that interview that Hunter Biden's controversial laptop came from Russia. She never said that. Trump has said his opponent doesn't do interviews because she can't handle them. He had previously declined another debate with Harris. So tonight may have been the largest audience for the candidates between now and Election Day.
Wow. You know, I've got to ask Jonathan Lemire. Well, before I ask, I think it's fascinating. Being fact-checked. I love when people fact-check me. I really do. I love, if I make a mistake, I want to know what I said that was wrong. People can disagree with me. Opinions are one thing, but I want to be fact-checked. If I say something wrong, I want to know that. I like most adults that I know are the same way. The fact that Donald Trump and his vice presidential nominee are so horrified at the prospect of being fact-checked suggests, well, it's the tell that they're still lying this week about the 2020 election. They're lying in a way that is very destructive for the people of North Carolina and South Carolina about hurricane relief, in a way that's getting in the way, and in a way that Republican governors are pushing back against them on. They're lying about dogs and cats being eaten in Ohio when the Republican governor there is saying that's a lie as well. The lies continue over and over again. But he doesn't go on because of the fact check, right? Why are they scared of fact check? Because they lie all the time, and you literally can see every day them lying on the campaign trail. Then he says he doesn't go on for an apology. He wants an apology from Lesley Stahl for something that never even happened. Again, deranged, disconnected, deluded, whatever you want to call it, or maybe just scared. And then finally, he says, Kamala Harris, this is really bizarre. I can't sit down on interviews because she doesn't know the issues. Again, as Hyland always says, it's either confession or projection. Here, Donald Trump is the one who skipped the 60 Minutes interview. First time in 50 years a candidate has done that. And is the one that refused to do a debate, even on Fox News. Even on Fox News, who many hosts on that network are echoing Donald Trump's disinformation.
They can't do a real interview.
And there's actually one of their most popular hosts suggests that civil war is better than voting, and that they need to move past voting. And yet she's willing to debate him there, and he refuses to do it. So last night, as I was watching this, I started asking John, like, what's going on, man? Like, what? I've heard from people inside his campaign, I know you have too, though they're very careful, a real frustration that they have no idea what this guy is going to do. He doesn't do the things he should do to win, and they can't control him at all. What are you hearing? Is there an understanding on his part that he is no longer up to sitting for serious interviews where people challenge him? Is his age, as Peter Baker wrote in the New York Times yesterday, really preventing him from doing serious interviews. The debate, not doing the debate. I'm dumbfounded because this is just not the behavior of somebody who wants to win an election.
No. So two things here. First of all, Vice President Harris did receive criticism, as we well know, in recent weeks for not doing many interviews. And look, some Democrats are really anxious, saying, look, she needs to do more. That is now changing. She sat for 60 Minutes. That aired last night. Today, she's with The View, Howard Stern, Stephen Colbert. She did a popular podcast over the weekend. She's really ramping up her own media appearances. And again, she's been consistent, saying, hey, I want a second debate with Donald Trump. Trump is the one who said no to the debate, and Trump is the one who said no to 60 Minutes. And there are a couple of things at play here. First of all, we heard J.D. Vance, as you alluded to, in the vice presidential debate, being upset, saying to moderators, wait, I thought you weren't going to fact check me, when they did, even modestly, because he was lying about something. And of course, now Trump did not want to submit himself to the fact checking last night. And this is something his aides have grown more and more frustrated with, their inability to steer him. And I know people watch this will say, well, no one can ever control Donald Trump. And that's largely true. But there were moments earlier in this campaign where Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita, the longtime Republican operatives who were running the campaign, were able to instill at least some sort of messaging through Trump. This is what we want to talk about this election. Now, it was much more effective when their opponent was President Biden than it is Vice President Harris. But even that is now gone. Trump just says whatever he wants. He only sits for friendly interviews. They ask him. I was talking to a Republican over the weekend saying if he would just talk about the economy every day. And even though the metrics are still good, but a lot of Americans don't feel it, they're like, if he would just talk about the economy every day, we'd win. But he can't, Willie. He can't and he won't. He wants to relitigate past grievances with Leslie Stahl. He wants to say racist things about migrants. He wants to just fight, and they can't keep him on message. And right now, there's a refusal for him to be challenged whatsoever, both in interviews, and I'm told, and I think Joe's heard this as well, even by his aides. He simply won't listen to them anymore. He does only what he wants to do.
So, Gene, to Jonathan and Joe's point here, Donald Trump is speaking only now in the echo chamber, exclusively in the echo chamber. He's preaching to the converted at rallies and in the interviews that he does do. You look at 60 Minutes, whether Donald Trump likes the interviewer or not, what are you going to get? 15, 20 million, probably at least, people watching that. The idea of this election is to convince some people who may be sitting on the fence, some people in the suburbs, to come to your side, to persuade them. He's just not doing any of that. So it's fair to ask strategically what he's thinking here with 4 weeks left until Election Day. What is his plan? How is he going about this? And by the way, as we talk about his outrageous and disgusting lies, we're looking at, on the bottom right of our screen, this hurricane that's coming, Milton, which is massive and is likely to be catastrophic. And he's still out there telling lies about the federal response to the previous hurricane, which Republican governors and mayors and senators are having to go out and rebut and saying the feds are doing their job to help us.
Yeah, those lies about the hurricane are worse than disgusting and
dangerous.
And they're really unforgivable, especially given that the second monster hurricane is now barreling down on Florida, and all he can think about is how to lie about the federal response to Helene, which was a total disaster in southern Appalachia. 60 Minutes was an opportunity for Donald Trump to talk to Republicans, maybe the suburban Republicans and right-leaning independents who they just aren't sure they can vote for this guy again. He's crazy. He's exhausting. January 6th, they can't quite get there, and it was a chance to speak to them and reassure them that he would be actually a different person because he is Donald Trump and we know who he is, but he didn't take that opportunity. Somebody I know quite well always says that politics is a game of addition, not subtraction. He had a chance to do addition on 60 Minutes, and he just passed it up.
Yeah, and instead he was interviewed by Laura Ingraham, who asked him if he was going to assure people that he would respect the rule of law
Oh, I'm so glad she asked him that.
And she said, a lot of people think you're going to lock up political opponents, and suggest there's been this story the New York Times about people in the media, people that he didn't like, you're going to lock them up, and you're not going to do that, are you? And he said, yeah, a lot of people want me to do that. They think it's a good idea. So
she pushed back hard, right?
She pushed back, and she's done that 2 times. Sean Hannity's done it on the dictator comment, and they keep saying, you're not really going to do this, are you? And he goes on and says, yes, he is. And that's what he's doing, as Willie said, speaking to the echo chamber. And a dark conspiratorial echo chamber, and we're going to get to it, but also sounding very much, how do you say it? I mean, he's talking about genes, and that immigrants have bad genes. It's kind of fascist, I think the Nazis.
We'll have more
about
about this.